Well, I would just love to welcome everybody here to the official first event of this year's Montana Book Festival. And I am Carla Thylan. I'm this year's director of the Montana Book Festival. At least I am still, unless something happens over the course of the next 4 days, unforeseen. But thank you so much for coming. And David Allen Cates is probably someone who does not need much of an introduction here, especially with our local crowd. But I'm going to just tell you a little bit about him anyway. David is the author of 5 novels and a chapbook of poetry, The Mysterious Location of Kyrgyzstan. His novels include Hunger in America, a New York Times notable book, X Out of Wonderland, and Freeman Walker, both Montana Book Award notable books, or Montana Book Award honor books. He's also the author of Ben Armstrong's Strange Trip Home and Tom Connor's Gift, both of which won gold medals for Best Fiction in the Independent Book Publishers Book Awards. He is the winner of the 2010 Montana Arts Council Innovative Artist Award, and his stories and poems have appeared in numerous literary magazines and his travel articles in Outside Magazine and the New York Times Sophisticated Traveler. Until February of 2017, Cates was the executive director of Missoula Medical Aid and led 40 teams of medical professionals to provide public health and surgery services in Honduras. He's a part-time faculty member at Pacific Lutheran University, and he is here with us today to share something really beautiful. So enjoy the next hour.
Thank you very much. That was a nice introduction. When my last book came out, I had this ill-planned reading in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and the person who was supposed to introduce me, well, the person who scheduled it didn't come, and the person who introduced me wasn't there, and there was just people there eating and drinking at the bar, and they didn't come for me, and so the bartender said, well, just go up and start. Well, this is the way we do it all the time. So I did. I went up and I started to introduce myself, and I really used a lot fewer words than she used, although I did try to tell a funny story. Partway through this 1-minute introduction of why I was standing up there, some guy at the bar turns around and goes, "If you're gonna read, fucking read." Well, by the time I finished reading, the place was cleared. That's true. They didn't come for me. And I read for a short time. When I was a few years into my writing life, there was a literary magazine out of Binghamton, New York, edited by the novelist John Gardner, called MSS. And I wanted to publish an MSS. I sent them story after story. And I always got polite rejections from various editors, under-editors. Finally, I don't know, maybe it was the 10th story, I got a handwritten note from John Gardner himself. He wrote, "The scene reads clearly enough on the page, but you have to remember your roots. You're telling a story around a fire. If your listeners don't care, they'll throw rocks." Really? So this craft will have nothing to do with, craft talk has nothing to do with getting it right on the page, or getting it clearly enough on the page. Not that it's good and proper to talk about how to get it clear on the page. For one thing, it's teachable. And for another, without craft, our voices are just seals barking on an island. But in fact, that's what I want to talk about. Seal barks, or rather where they come from. Because without it, without that urge to sing, to speak, to write, we've got nothing to put into our lovely structures. We've got nothing at all. So I'm going to talk about the fuel that drives the writer, the passion that drives him or her, you or me, to want to put something down on paper. I'm going to talk about the raw materials of stories and poems, what makes them matter, what makes people across the fire keep their rocks to themselves. So let's start with two universal truths. Universal truths are a good place to start. And when I say universal, I mean for all people, in all times, and all cultures. We all suffer. We all die. And the third is that we know it.
We what?
We know it. We're aware of it. We're aware of our mortality. And because those three things are true, it also somehow follows in order to avoid the despair that might reasonably accompany those facts, we're forced to do something. We're forced to find some meaning in this flickering, painful life, some dignity. So how do we do it? A not so disastrous simplification of Viktor Frankl might be this: we make things. We suffer, and sometimes even in suffering there's a possibility of redemption, and we love. If everybody in this room told a love story, would we know all about love? All about it? Would we know it like we know this thing or that chair or the floor, like the window? We wouldn't, because love is mysterious. It doesn't fit in a box. It can't be definitely defined. It's like courage, cowardice, good, evil. The only way we know these things is from experience. And because our own experience is by nature narrow, and brief, we know love also by stories. And because love, passion, is such a driving force in how we make meaning of our lives, if somebody came in this room and stood in the back and raised his hand and said, "Hey, I have a great love story," wouldn't we all look his way? Wouldn't we all wait and listen for the story? Over and over again in stories and literature, love either redeems or it doesn't. Redeems the broken, the imperfect, the good, the bad. Gatsby, the phony, perhaps redeemed by love, or not. Humbert, the pervert murderer in Lolita, is redeemed by love, or not. Why would we ever read page after page about Jake Barnes and his drunken friends and the sun also rises, except for the little fact that Jake loves Brett? The sad little fact that Jake loves Brett, and he can't do anything about it. How universal is that? What human being makes it through this life without knowing that feeling? "Oh, Jake," Brett says to him at the end, "we could have had such a damn good time together." To which he replies, anybody remember what he replies?
Isn't it pretty to think so?
Isn't it pretty to think so? So let's think so, I mean. Think of Jane Austen's heroes. Will I marry the man I love? Yes, thank goodness. Yes, Lizzie. Yes, you will. But not until you've suffered. And we'll follow you through your travails, and we'll follow all of your brother and sister characters and all of Jane Austen, because when the question has that kind of stakes, a life without love, a marriage with no possibility of divorce to somebody we don't love, or to somebody without enough money to take care of our children, we'll endure anything to find out, won't we? And there's Janie in Zora Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Janie, too, has the brave little notion, the quixotic notion she wants to love the man she's married to. She wants to love and be loved. Through how many windmill collisions or marriages will we follow her to find out if she ever reaches her goal? 2, 3, 4, and all because she wants love, to love and be loved. Well, is she a hero or a fool? Finally, she finds it with Tea Cake. That's his name, Tea Cake. Love, great. But then Janie has to shoot Tea Cake because he gets rabies defending her from a dog gone crazy. God damn. Life is cruel. Life is absolutely unpredictable except for the two things we know, remember? We suffer, we die. Miss Hurston's prose and her careful craftsmanship aside, really, who cares about that? It's a means to an end. It's the basket the fruit is delivered in. What is it we care about when somebody brings in a basket of fruit when we're hungry? We care about the fruit. We care about the love. Well, I guess if we're writers or basket makers, we care about the basket. But as readers, we care about the love that once Janie finds slips through her fingers like water. Yet it leaves her life redeemed nonetheless. Redeemed or not. It gives her life meaning. Maybe. Maybe. The universe is very big and very empty, so we have to fill it. As livers, as well as writers, we have to invent ourselves. The universe doesn't care. But it's hard to do. So we are inspired, filled with spirit by those who can, by those who do love, and those who write about it. In James Salter's A Sport and a Pastime, a young man is about to leave his French lover and go back across the sea to finish school. The narrator observer describes the young man like this: we are subject to his friendship, to his love. It is the principles of his world to which we respond, to which we seek to find in ourselves. It is his power, which I cannot even identify, which is flickering, sometimes present, sometimes not. Without it, he's empty, a body without breath. It is his power which guarantees his existence, even afterwards, when he is gone. It's the same power that Gatsby has over Nick, the narrator, the great Gatsby, over Nick and over us. Maybe we think Gatsby's a fraud. Maybe he stands for everything we don't approve of. But he loves Daisy in his strange way. And because all our loves are strange, all of our loves are strange, we can't, if we're honest with ourselves, which is what the book ultimately asks us to be, we can't hold that against him. Gatsby is ultimately redeemed by his love, or not. Those are the only questions that matter, and that's what stories are about. So the world is empty, have I said that already? But somehow full, too, of ignorance and ugliness. And we suffer, and we're going to die. Gatsby does. But those shirts he bought because he loved Daisy, folded, stacked in his closet. Imagine touching them, letting your hand fall over the fabric. The soft, rich heap, shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange and monograms of Indian blue. Suddenly, with a strained sound, Fitzgerald writes, Daisy bent her head into the shirts. They're such beautiful shirts, she sobbed, her voice muffled in the thick folds. It's enough to make her cry. In this empty, dark, sad, unjust, cruel world, it might be enough to make all of us cry. So listen, as writers, if you give your character a deep and driving passion, it doesn't have to be romantic. It can be any kind of love, even love that sometimes starts with hate. We will follow your character anywhere, and maybe even forgive him or her of anything. In A River Runs Through It, Brother Paul loved to fly fish for trout in the Blackfoot. Remember? Blackfoot River? Paul was a gambler, a drinker. He was a fuck-up. He was doomed. We're all fuck-ups. We're all doomed. But Paul loved fly fishing. And so he's redeemed. And the narrator loved Paul. And so he is, or not. like Janie, like Lizzie, like Gatsby, like Daisy touching Gatsby's shirts. In a world full of suffering and death, ugliness and cruelty, Paul McLean, we're told, we believe, is beautiful. A few years ago, I sat on the stage and watched through tears as murderous Lady Macbeth lay down not 3 feet in front of me. It was a small theater. I could see the moisture on her skin, see her chest rise and fall as she breathed. I could imagine her greedy, selfish heart, like mine, like ours, as she wrung her hands and said, here's the smell of blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh, oh, oh. And then still to herself, wash your hands, put on your nightgown, look not so pale, I tell you, yet Banquo's buried. He cannot come out of his grave. For yes, we die. Have I mentioned that? Yeah. Killed sometimes even by people we owe money to, like Paul McLean, by enraged and mistaken cuckolds like Gatsby, or by the Macbeths of the world. And we can never come out of our graves again. And isn't this true for our loves as well? For Lady Macbeth's love of what's lost for her forever, her own innocence, her own clean hands, the lives of so many, of Banquo, the Macbeth's good and wise friend, loved by them and then murdered by them. Banquo, who dead, will never, ever come back. Love, remember, love is the fruit, it's not the basket. Here's another story, more romantic certainly than Lady Macbeth's. Remember Florentino Arisa, who can't marry the love of his life, Fermina Daza, in love in the time of cholera. Florentino spends his lifetime making himself wealthy and carrying on with a vast abundance of lovers. A hyperbolic number so large only Garcia Marquez could imagine it. And yet neither his wealth nor the unending parade of women could make him forget Fermina or lose his determination to outlive her husband and try to win her back. And finally he does. Decades later, he outlives her husband and wins her back. And he asks her on a river cruise. And they finally make love. And as the ship reaches its port, Fermina panics that the relationship will cause a scandal on shore. To spare her this, Florentino has the captain raise the yellow flag of cholera. No port will let them land. So the two of them are forever exiled to their boat to cruise the river. That's how the story ends. Exiled, strange and exiled. But isn't that just like the love in your life? Happy, sad, sad, happy, sad, happy, sad. Which brings me to Shakespeare, our literary roots. Not John Gardner's caveman that I was talking about before, but still our roots. Let's look at the sonnets. You don't have to spend much time with the sonnets to understand what they're about, over and over again. 1, life is painful and we all die. 2, before we die, we lose what we love. Or we can lose what we love. 3, the speaker is always telling you that he's trying to hold it in words. And 4, trying to hold it in words is really hard. He says that a lot. In the famous sonnet 18, but thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou ownest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines, this poem, to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this poem, and this gives life to thee. Or this full-out trash talk to time. in the next sonnet, 19. Devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paw, and make the earth devour her own sweet brood. Pluck the keen teeth from the fierce tiger's jaws, and burn the long-lived phoenix in her blood. Make glad and sorry seasons as thou fleest, and do whatever thou wilt, swift-footed time, to the wide world and all her fading sweets. But I forbid thee one most heinous crime. O carve not with thy hours my love's fair brow. Okay. So we suffer and die, and because love is the highest expression of our lives, we write about it. Maybe even make it last. Up yours, time. My love shall in my verse ever live young. Like in Sonnet 81. When all the breathers of this world are dead, you shall live. Such virtue has my pen. Shakespeare. But he wasn't always so certain. Writing, after all, is like trying to hold water in a basket, or better make a basket so good it makes us imagine it's filled with fruit. Let's go back to the first metaphor. It's like a magic trick. And it's hard, really hard. The speaker in the sonnets, when he's not trash-talking time, constantly refers to his difficulty finding the words that will somehow hold, circle, contain the empty hole created when a loved one dies. The sonnets invite the imagination to fill the hole left when the beautiful chaos of temporal life fades and moves and slides away. But the words are often wrong and not enough. In Sonnet 147, my thoughts and my discourse as madmen's are, at random from the truth vainly expressed. For I have sworn the fair and thought the bright, who are as black as hell and dark as night. And here's Keats 200 years later, Shakespeare 400 years ago, Keats 200 years ago, 200 years after Shakespeare. Why not? These dead white men wrote about what everybody's written about. What we, the living, the suffering, the not yet dead, need to write about. What's Keats say about the nightingale? He says, it's so sad here on earth, it's so sad being mortal. The speaker wants to fade far away, dissolve, and quite forget what the nightingale has never known. He wants to forget the weariness, the fever, and the fret here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes the few sad last gray hairs, where youth grows spectre-thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, and where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine for them beyond tomorrow. This is why we write, because it falls away, it falls apart. It all falls away. Here's Keats again, same nightingale poem in the last stanza. After he's returned to his soul self, alone, alone, a man on earth who, despite the immense powers of his imagination, will, like all humans on earth, lose, love and die. Adieu, he says to the nightingale in its song. Thy fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillsides, and now is buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? Good question, John. Good question. Floating in grief, our little lives brief, Aren't we still trying to answer it? Okay, now I'm going to change tack. I'm going to turn this toward the writer, toward us as writers. I'm going to try to tell a series of stories. The silence feels empty, and telling the stories feels empty and inadequate, but I'm trying to weave the basket that holds the nothing in the basket that somehow compels our imaginations to fill with fruit, to fill with love. Stories and poems are a plunge into the mysteries. Love, death, courage, change. They are an opportunity, an invitation to feel compassion, to imagine love. How do we get there? How do we go into that deep and mysterious well? Deep into the self. Here's the paradox. We are most unique and most alike in that place where stories come from. We don't find our unique voices anywhere but deep down inside us, past all the bullshit, past all the supposed tos and want tos and wish I were's. We find them by being brave enough to be our slobby, stupid, scared, ashamed, angry, sometimes even hateful, and yes, loving selves. My second daughter is a singer. She went away her junior year of high school to study at Interlaken, an art school in Michigan. Interlaken's a fine place, but with about 300 girls and 150 boys, half of whom are gay, it's slim pickings for a heterosexual girl. In the spring after her first year, I picked her up at the airport here in Missoula, and we were driving home in the car. We were driving past Hellgate High School, where she'd gone to school the year before, and the sidewalks were clustered with groups of boys. She had her face to the window, really practically plastered against the window. Staring at the groups of boys filling the sidewalk. She watched, and we had to stop because people were crossing the street, and after a while she couldn't hold it any longer, and she shouted in one long breath loudly, "I want a straight boy, don't want a gay boy, I want a straight boy, don't want a gay boy, I want a straight boy, don't want a gay boy." And when she finished, there was this silence in the car. I was holding onto the steering wheel. Finally I said, "Margie, that's a song." And think of how songs are. How in a song you can let something pour out of you that you couldn't or wouldn't say. Love me, love me, love me forever. I can't live if living is without you. I am lonely, I am lonely, I am lonely. In my most recent novel, I had a feeling that what I needed to write was essentially a song, an opera-like novel with two voices, a duet. Two voices singing their arias, unashamedly in the dark. We don't get there to that kind of passion through the mind. We get there through the body, through our breath, the pleasure of air, light, and the joy and burden of having a body. We get there through the possibilities of play and laughter, and by landing somehow, finding somehow that first source of words. Almost 10 years ago, I was on the rooftop of a hotel in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. It was morning. I had a few hours before I had to go to the airport. It wasn't a fancy hotel. There were a lot of crates with empty beer bottles, lots of buckets and wires, broken fans, broken dishes, clotheslines. And the half wall I was leaning against, sitting on one of those buckets, reading Whitman. A few months before I'd finished the third draft of a novel, third draft in 3 years. I'd already published a couple of novels, so I wasn't a beginner. But I thought this draft, although not done, was close, that I'd had a breakthrough. And I was excited. I wanted to get it read before I moved on and rewrote. So I handed it out to readers I trusted, and the response floored me. "It's awful." What? I mean, I know it's not done, but awful, yes. But what about it is awful? Even this part? No, I don't see it. What about this other part? Is that working? Not that I can see. The response was so unequivocal, I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. I knew there was something there. I knew it and felt it deep inside me, but it was clear I'd failed to completely get it down right. And I thought, I dared to think I was close. So I slunk off, did nothing, sulked, hurt, lived with that for a while. Months passed. I'd look at my hands and my veins. Maybe I just didn't have enough blood in my body for this book. I felt like I'd been punched and lost my wind, and the wind hadn't come back. I went to Honduras to work as a translator with medical teams a couple of times, October and then again, this time, January. I was on the rooftop reading Whitman. The sky was blue, the wind was blowing the laundry on the line. The wind was blowing. Poetry was filling my sails too, Whitman. That's a lot of wind. And I stood up to look out over the crappy old city and take a deep breath, and like some mystical, biblical, weird thing, suddenly I knew what I had to do. I could feel it in my chest. I could feel it in my throat. And breathe. Just breathe. And then open your goddamn throat and let it out. Just let it out. Really? My narrator in that book was a 19th century freed slave, educated in England, wandering the Civil War battlefields, the gold fields of the West. Open my throat. But I could feel it there, the constriction. I could feel it. I was a middle-aged man. I'd failed at so many things. But on that rooftop, in the big breeze, Whitman in my hand, I could feel my throat start to open. And I knew if I let it rip, I could finish the novel. Open your throat. Sing it. Let it rip. The music's in you or it's not. But you don't know until you tilt your head back and sing. There's more, though, and this is the scary part. Because it's not just about the song. You've got to get to the place where you have nothing left to do but sing. You've got to let yourself fall into the well, or swim to the island, to the place where the seal barks come from, to the place where there's nothing left but the knowledge of your own mortality and your response to that certainty. For a couple of years, when I was a young writer, all I wrote were scenes. Not stories, scenes. And for a couple of years, all I wrote were paragraphs. Just paragraphs. What was I learning? What did I think I was doing? Actually, I don't know for sure. Maybe I was crazy, but I know now I was learning craft. I was young, in my 20s, and we had children already, and I probably had diapers on the line. I had hay I'd mowed and needed to be getting in the barn. I had cattle to feed, fences to fix. I did all those things. But mainly I wrote and read, and I was learning how to put into form the feelings I had in my body, the feelings of vulnerability and mortality that would ultimately animate my fiction, that animates all of our work as writers. The universal questions that kept our listeners across the fire from throwing rocks. I failed often, and so often, and at so many things, that the memories of some of those years are sometimes still unpleasant. But it's the failure, ultimately, that takes you where you need to go. It's the stumble, it's the fall, unfortunately, through your own self, your own body, down to the part you share with every other human being. Your own bone-deep, belly-deep knowledge of suffering and death. Once you get there, inhabit that world with the ghosts and with others who don't think like you do. Then you see what happens. Then you see what happens. Here's a love story. At my nephew's wedding, my brother's son, back on the farm, my brother was a ski racer. He loves skiing. He has a rowing machine in his basement, and when he exercises, he puts in DVDs of World Cup races that he's seen dozens of times already. But you can hear him down there rowing, sometimes yelling, expressing awe and delight. Each time he watches, he was really, really good himself. Not World Cup or U.S. team, but at its best, maybe in the top 20 in the country in slalom. Not bad for a Midwestern boy. Anyway, Dick's son Eric skied for the national championship Dartmouth ski team in 2007, I think, and many of Eric's teammates, some U.S. team members, Olympians, medalists, are there at the wedding. And the next day in the basement, we're hanging out, and Dick calls these half dozen young men and women down to show them his skis. It says a wall full of skis. This is what we used for slalom. This is what I learned on. Wooden, no edges. This is what we use for downhill. This is what this is what we use for downhill. And he'd lift each pair, and he'd hold them in his hands and turn them. And the young men and women were rapt, listening. The Olympic medalists, the World Cup skiers, you, me. This ski, my brother said, this lover of skis and skiing. This one, he said, holding one like a child. Feel it, touch it. See? Do you ever let yourself get so bored and so alone, you feel an aching hollow in your chest? Almost like there's an air pocket around your heart. A hole in there. A slight fuzzy that starts at the edge of boredom and desire. And the razor edge between hope and despair. I'm really trying to describe a place. It's in the body. It's teased by your breathing. It almost tickles. But you can't gulp or inhale it. Or whatever it needs. Something there and not there at the same time. It's lonely and terrible. And you feel the loss of everything you've ever loved, and only there can you sometimes see beauty. From that place of love and loss, light on leaves with night coming on can make you feel it. It or nothing. The buzz of nothing on hot, sultry afternoons with nothing to do, to look at while holding the heavy certainty that your life is just a series of actions with no meaning. What if I want to say that that's sometimes where art comes from? The edge of despair, the root of yearning, the heart of melancholy. Again, here's Keats, as good a guide as any. He's talking about melancholy. He says to imprison her soft hand and let her rave and feed deep, deep upon her peerless eyes. For she, melancholy, dwells with beauty, beauty that must die, and joy whose hand is ever at his lips bidding adieu, and aching pleasure nigh, turning to poison as the bee mouth sips. Aye, in the very temple of delight, veiled melancholy has her sovereign shrine. Though seen of none save him whose strenuous tongue can burst joy's grape against his palate fine, his soul shall taste the sadness of her might and be among her cloudy trophies hung. So, finally, we readers and writers, we've got to love this stuff. The aching beauty of the words, how they sound, and then the silence. How our mouths form them from breath, how like our lives they are here, then they are gone. Their vaporous essence should make your skin turn inside out, because how else to endure what you'll most likely have to endure? To stand and look out at the world and let the bottom fall out of the moment. Let's face it, writing is not a career. 99% of us will earn very little money. 99% of us will get little acclaim beyond a few dozen, a few hundred, a few thousand readers. We endure what every other human being on earth has endured. All the lost things. And you'll endure it like everybody else by answering these three questions. Did you work today? Did you eat? Did you love? So the sheer impossibility of holding life and love with your physical hands makes telling stories and writing poems our way to create the space in a structure, in a basket of words, for us to feel a heart beating, to imagine feeling it, which if we do well enough will help somebody else feel it. The heart, the life, the beat, the love, which is all that matters and the only reason to try. I die, Hamlet says at the end of the play, the stage littered with bodies. I die, Horatio. So tell him with the occurrence more or less which I've solicited. So tell Fortinbras the story, Hamlet says, more or less, that has made all of this happen. Our stage, like Hamlet's, is also littered with bodies, in our own lives perhaps, but also just here in this room. Think how many long gone have come through those doors, who've lived their lives out there on Main Street over the decades, fallen in love, walked with their children, disappeared into the grave. So write the poem, the wind whispers, into the ear of the writer. The sunlight is on the leaves now. Tell the story, Horatio. The rest, Hamlet says, is silence. Thank you.